The generators were humming when the radios finally went quiet. That low, steady drone filled the command tent, mechanical and patient, like it would keep going no matter what names were written down inside. Dawn light seeped through the seams of the canvas, washing everything in a colorless gray. I sat alone at the folding table with the mission report in front of me. Finished, stamped, successful. Casualties listed as 0. The paper was clean in a way the night had not been. A senior officer stepped in and slid the clipboard toward me. He rubbed his eyes first like he had not slept, then tapped the signature line without speaking. Outside, my soldiers laughed. Someone struck a lighter. The sound carried easy, careless. To them, the mission was over. Inside, the generator hummed louder in the quiet, and beneath it, another sound pushed its way back into my head. A single sharp crack from the dark. Then nothing. Except that hum, steady. Ignoring us, I picked up the pen. My hand hesitated. For a split second, an image flashed uninvited. A bright yellow grocery bag twisted tight around a wrist, the only color I could remember. I set the pen down. The silence stretched. I understood then that if I signed my name, this version would become permanent. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was a first lieutenant then, stationed out of Fort Calder, a small training base surrounded by flat land and long skies in western Kansas. The year was 2013. Fort Calder was not the kind of place people bragged about serving. It was quiet, functional, and forgettable, which made it perfect for training missions that were supposed to stay contained. My job was to lead a mixed platoon assigned to domestic security support and training operations. We guarded corridors, supported infrastructure protection, and ran exercises meant to prepare units for deployments elsewhere. We were armed, but the work was framed as controlled, disciplined, low risk. I believed in that framing. Staff Sergeant Daniel Holt was my anchor. He had spent most of his adult life in uniform and carried himself like nothing surprised him anymore. When Holt said something mattered, it did. Specialist Kevin Raines was 19 years old, new to the Army, sharp and eager, still learning the difference between readiness and fear. Sergeant Michelle Alvarez was precise and quiet, the kind of soldier who noticed things early and trusted her instincts, even when she did not say them out loud. The mission briefing came down clean and confident. A short operation along a remote training corridor near an almost abandoned farming town. Old silos. A handful of decaying houses. No active residents according to the packet. The reason for the mission was framed carefully. There had been recent reports of copper thefts at relay stations and power infrastructure in the area. Meth addicts, they said, unpredictable. Sometimes armed. We were told to expect scavengers who might panic if surprised. That line mattered later. At the time, it explained why a domestic training mission required loaded weapons and night movement. It justified the tension we were encouraged to maintain. Stay alert. Assume volatility. Control the scene quickly if contact occurred. The briefing labeled the mission routine, low complexity. No expected civilian presence. We were told this kind of operation was about deterrence as much as anything else. Show presence. Secure the area. Leave no footprint. I trusted the intelligence. I trusted the maps. I trusted that if there was risk outside those margins, someone above me would have flagged it. I also trusted the reporting process. I had been taught that reports were not just paperwork. They were records. They were how the Army remembered what happened after the people who lived it rotated out. Accuracy mattered because the next unit would read those words and shape their decisions around them. Before we moved out, I walked the line and checked in with my soldiers. Holt met my eyes and gave a small nod. Raines talked a little too fast, trying to burn off nerves. Alvarez adjusted her gear, calm and methodical. They trusted me to read the situation correctly. That trust was not abstract. It was personal. The corridor itself looked empty the way the briefing promised. Wide land. No movement, no lights. The kind of place where sound traveled far and mistakes echoed longer than you expected. It felt controlled. Predictable. As we rolled out, I remember thinking how ordinary it all felt. Another mission to complete. Another report to file. Another box to check. That calm was not arrogance. It was faith in a system that had worked before. Faith that the guardrails were real. Faith that if something went wrong, it would be within the boundaries we had been warned about. I did not yet understand how dangerous that kind of faith could be. Because what followed was not chaos. It was not recklessness. It was a slow drift away from certainty, one small detail at a time, until the distance between what we were told and what we were seeing became impossible to ignore. And by the time I would be asked to put my name on a piece of paper declaring success, the cost of trusting the wrong version of events would already be written somewhere far more permanent than a report. We moved out before nightfall, just as the light started to thin and stretch across the plains. The sky flattened into pale gray, and the wind came up steady from the west, carrying sound farther than it should have. Vehicles stayed spaced and slow, tires crunching over gravel that had not been disturbed in years. On paper, the timing was perfect. We would reach the corridor, set security, and be clear before full dark. Almost immediately, small things stopped lining up. The maps did not match the ground the way they should have. Fence lines marked as intact had collapsed into the dirt. A service road shown as maintained had been swallowed by weeds and ruts. Nothing dramatic enough to halt a mission, but enough that I kept checking the map again, trying to force it to agree with what was in front of us. Radio traffic felt off, not broken, just delayed. Messages came through a few seconds late, like the air itself was dragging its feet. I ran a quick comms check. Everything came back green, but the lag stayed. Staff Sergeant Holt pulled alongside me when we paused near a low-rise. He did not sound alarmed. He rarely did. He pointed toward a dark shape ahead, barely visible against the land. "That should not be there," he said. I raised my optics. A structure sat where the briefing said there was nothing. Low. Square. Too intact to have been forgotten. It cast a clean shadow even in fading light. I reported it up the chain in the same calm tone I used for everything else. The response came back quickly. "Structure is abandoned. Not relevant to mission. Continue." No hesitation. No curiosity. Just certainty. Holt suggested a minor reroute. A few hundred yards. Enough to give distance while we confirmed what we were looking at. It was a reasonable call, the kind that kept small problems from becoming larger ones. I asked again. I explained the concern more clearly. The answer did not change. We were already running a few minutes behind schedule, and I felt that quiet pressure settle in. Not fear, not urgency. Just the push to keep moving. Deviations required explanations. Explanations attracted attention. Attention slowed everything down. I told Holt we would stay on course. As we moved closer, the land grew quieter instead of darker. Birds disappeared. The wind dropped. Sound stopped carrying the way it had earlier, replaced by a heavy stillness that made every step feel louder. No one spoke unless necessary. Even Rains, who usually filled silence with nervous chatter, went quiet. Another radio delay stretched longer than the last. When the response finally came through, it sounded disconnected, like it belonged to a moment that had already passed. Sergeant Alvarez caught my eye and gave a small shake of her head. Not disagreement, awareness. She had noticed the same gaps. The structure was closer now. Details sharpened, straight edges. A door reinforced more recently than the rest of the building. That detail mattered, even if no one wanted to say it aloud. I reported again. This time the response was shorter. Continue. The space between what we were seeing and what we were being told widened with every step. I felt responsible for closing that gap, one way or another, either by trusting the briefing or trusting my people. There was still no overt danger, no weapons, no movement, just mismatched details and the growing sense that we were operating on information that had expired without anyone updating it. By the time the light finally gave way to full dark, I knew something about this mission was wrong. Not loud wrong. Quiet wrong. The kind that waits until you are already committed before it makes itself known. Night settled in hard once the last light disappeared. The plains lost their depth, and everything flattened into dark shapes and broken lines. Visibility narrowed to whatever our optics could give us, and even that felt unreliable with dust hanging low and the air cooling fast. The structure that had bothered us since daylight now felt closer, heavier, like the darkness had pulled it inward. We shifted into night operations without a word needing to be said. Voices dropped. Movements tightened. Every step became deliberate. At night, hesitation and speed are both dangerous in different ways. That was when Holt stopped and raised his fist. Movement. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just enough to be real. A shake near the structure where nothing had been seconds earlier. Alvarez angled her body slightly, trying to pick up detail, but the dark swallowed edges before they could form. I keyed the radio and reported possible movement, keeping my voice level. The first response came back, telling us to hold position and observe. Before I could acknowledge, another transmission cut in over it, slightly delayed but firm. Maintain momentum. Do not allow unknowns to disrupt mission timeline. 2 instructions, close together. Neither directly canceling the other, both expecting obedience. I asked for clarification. Static, followed by a delayed reply that sounded like it had been meant for someone else. Use discretion. Continue mission. Discretion is a heavy word when you are the one expected to define it. Alvarez leaned toward me just enough for her voice to carry through the noise of gear and breathing. Something is wrong, she said. No panic. Just certainty. Holt waited. He did not push. He trusted that I would read the situation the same way he was reading it. I weighed our options fast. Pulling back would mean admitting uncertainty. It would delay the timeline. It would invite questions later. Advancing would keep us aligned with intent as it had been framed. Secure the area. Complete the task. The movement had stopped. Or maybe it had never been there. Night has a way of manufacturing doubt. I made the call to advance, not rush, not charge. Just close the distance enough to confirm what we were dealing with. The moment the decision left my mouth, the tension changed. It did not ease. It settled. Responsibility dropped into place, solid and immovable. We tightened formation and moved closer than planned. Gravel popped under boots. Fabric brushed fabric. Breathing sounded too loud inside my helmet. Every small noise felt like it might be the one that mattered. Radio traffic picked up again, uneven and poorly timed. Someone asked for an update. Someone else responded too late. The rhythm was off, and that alone raised my pulse more than the movement had. Alvarez slowed slightly, not stopping, just enough to signal hesitation. Her way of telling me she disagreed without breaking discipline. I acknowledged it with a nod she probably could not see. The structure filled most of my field of view now, close enough that details mattered. Close enough that turning back would no longer erase the risk we had accepted. The pressure to obey orders did not come from shouting or threats. It came from momentum, from expectation, from the quiet understanding that compliance is remembered more kindly than caution. I told myself we were still within intent, still doing what we had been sent to do. I told myself advancing was the responsible choice. Even as I did, I knew we had crossed an invisible line, not into chaos, not yet, but into a space where judgment and obedience were no longer aligned. The platoon moved forward, closer than planned, carrying with us a decision that could not be undone. It happened faster than any briefing ever admits it can. One sharp sound cut through the dark, not loud enough to be a threat, not quiet enough to ignore. Metal catching metal. A loose panel snapping back. In the half-second it took my brain to register it, every muscle in my body tightened at once. Someone shouted a warning. I never figured out who. The word came out broken, stretched thin by urgency, and before it finished leaving their mouth, a single shot cracked the air. There was no follow-on fire. No exchange. Just that one sound, violent and final, tearing through the night. Then silence, not true silence. The kind that feels hollow. The wind stalled. Radio stayed quiet. And somewhere far off, barely noticeable but constant, the base generators hummed on, steady and indifferent, like nothing we did out here had the power to interrupt them. I moved without thinking. Training took over before shock had time to settle. Holt was already lowering his weapon, his face rigid, eyes fixed on something just out of my view. Rain stood frozen a few steps back, his hands locked on his rifle so tight his knuckles showed white even in the dark. That was when I saw her. She was clutching a plastic grocery bag. Bright yellow. It was tangled around her wrist, stretched thin, like she had grabbed it in a hurry and never let go. It was the only color in the entire world. No weapon. No threat. Just that bag, swinging slightly as her arm fell still. For a moment, no one spoke. No one needed to. The truth landed all at once, heavy and undeniable. I dropped to my knees and called for medical aid, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Alvarez was already moving, hands steady, eyes focused, training overriding shock. Holt knelt beside her, applying pressure where he needed to, saying nothing because there was nothing he could say that would change what we were seeing. We did everything we were trained to do. Assess. Treat. Call it in. Again and again. Time warped, stretching and collapsing at the same time. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes disappeared altogether. The generators kept humming. When the medic arrived, I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. He worked anyway, we all did. Because stopping would have meant acknowledging what none of us were ready to accept yet. She did not survive. The realization did not come like a wave. It came like a weight settling slowly, pressing down until there was no room left to deny it. This was not an accident inside acceptable margins. This was not an unforeseen complication. The mission parameters we had been given were wrong, fundamentally wrong. There had been civilian presence. There had been activity. The certainty we were told to rely on had never existed. Shock moved through the platoon quietly. No shouting, no panic. Rain sank down hard onto the dirt, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Alvarez looked at me once, her expression calm but altered, like something inside her had shifted and locked into place. Holt stayed focused until there was nothing left to do, then leaned back slightly, his shoulders sagging just enough to show the cost. I keyed the radio and requested guidance. My voice followed protocol. Location. Status. Casualty. The words came out clean and practiced, stripped of emotion because emotion had nowhere to go. The response took longer than it should have. When it finally came through, it felt hollow. Acknowledged. Secure the area. Stand by. No questions, no pause. No recognition of what had just happened. Just instructions, delivered as if this were any other deviation in an otherwise controlled exercise. The generators hummed on. As we secured the area, the structure that had troubled us since daylight no longer looked ordinary. Every angle felt accusatory. Every shadow replayed the moments leading up to the shot. The movement, the hesitation, the decision to advance. This was not chaos the way people imagine it. There was no screaming, no frantic motion. It was quieter than that. More disciplined, more devastating. Standing there in the dark, I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. This mission would still be called a success. I could already hear the language forming. Unforeseen variable. Lawful action. Procedures followed. That version would cost less. Less paperwork. Less scrutiny. Less discomfort for people far removed from this place. The bright yellow bag lay still against the dirt, and somewhere in the distance, the generators continued their steady drone, already drowning out the truth we were standing in. Higher command arrived before sunrise, just as the cold settled into the ground and made everything feel heavier. Vehicles rolled in quietly, lights kept low, engines idling in that same steady rhythm I had been hearing since the night before. The generators never stopped. They filled every pause, every gap in conversation, like the system reminding us it was still running. The sight changed the moment they arrived. What had been ours became managed, controlled, measured. We were separated and asked for statements one by one. It happened fast, too fast for reflection. Names, times, distances, where you were standing, what you saw, what you heard. Answers were written down immediately, trimmed to essentials, shaped into sentences that fit neatly on a page. No one accused anyone of anything. No one raised their voice. The pressure did not come from anger. It came from efficiency. As the statements were compiled, the language shifted. Subtly at first, what I had called a woman became an unknown individual. The structure was described as abandoned. Movement was labeled suspicious activity. The word civilian appeared once, then disappeared entirely in later drafts. The word success stayed. Mission success. Area secured. Situation stabilized. I heard it repeated like a refrain, each time landing wrong in my chest. When it was my turn, I was handed a draft report. It was clean, professional, calm. It read like the kind of document people trusted because it sounded confident. It also left out things that mattered. The yellow grocery bag was not mentioned. The hesitation before advancing was gone. The conflicting radio instructions had been compressed into a single, orderly sequence. Casualties were listed as 0. I read it slowly, twice. Each omission felt intentional, not cruel, just convenient. An officer stood near the table while I read. He did not rush me. When I looked up, he spoke quietly, almost kindly. "This protects your platoon," he said. "It keeps this from becoming something bigger than it needs to be." I asked what he meant. He gestured vaguely toward the perimeter, toward the soldiers waiting. "Investigations freeze units. Careers stall. People get stuck in place." He did not say names, but I heard them anyway. Holt, Rains, Alvarez. He told me the system worked best when reports focused on outcomes, not complications. That mistakes higher up the chain did not need to be dragged into the open if the operational result stayed the same. That what happened could be absorbed if it was framed correctly. The generators hummed louder in the silence that followed his words. I asked about adding context, about noting uncertainty. The answer came gently but firmly. Not necessary, not helpful. Potentially confusing. Confusing for whom went unspoken. By the time the sun rose fully, the report had been revised again. Polished. Final. It said what it needed to say to move forward. All it needed now was a signature. I held the clipboard and felt its weight settle into my hands. Heavier than my gear, heavier than the night itself. Signing would align me with the machine that was already moving. Refusing would slow it down. I understood then what the real cost was. Not discipline, not punishment, but isolation. Quiet, procedural, and lasting. The generator continued its steady drone, filling the space where doubt lived, waiting to see whether my name would fall into line with everything else. The meeting happened behind a closed flap later that morning, after the statements were collected and the site had been scrubbed of anything that did not fit neatly into a timeline. The tent was quiet except for the generator outside, that same low, steady hum that never seemed to change no matter what did. The senior officer sat across from me again. Up close, he looked exhausted. Not angry, not cold, just worn down in the way people get when they have been carrying too much responsibility for too long. He rubbed his eyes before speaking, pressing his fingers into the bridge of his nose like he was trying to hold something back. "Lieutenant," he said, "I need you to understand what happens next if this report gets flagged." He did not talk about rules or violations. He talked about people. "If this becomes a shooting investigation, the entire training cycle freezes," he said. "Holt's retirement packet stops moving. He has been counting down to that date for years. Raines's transfer gets denied. He stays stuck here while everyone else rotates out. Alvarez gets pulled into interviews and reviews for months. None of them did anything wrong, and this will still land on them." He paused, letting that settle. "You think you are protecting the truth," he continued, "but what you are really doing is punishing your platoon for a bad night and bad information that did not start with you." The generator filled the silence after his words, steady and relentless. He told me the system was built to absorb mistakes quietly when possible, that reports like this were designed to keep damage contained, that leadership sometimes meant choosing the version of events that caused the least harm overall. He never once said the report was accurate. He did not have to. I listened without interrupting, my hands resting flat on the table. As he spoke, my mind drifted to Holt's calm presence in the dark, his hand steady even when everything else fell apart. I thought about Raines, 19 years old, sitting in the dirt afterward, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I thought about Alvarez slowing just enough to warn me, trusting her instincts when no one else did. I thought about the oath I took, standing straight and confident, believing words like integrity and accountability were fixed points, not variables. The officer slid the clipboard toward me again. The report looked final now, polished, professional. The kind of document people trusted because it sounded certain. "Sign it," he said quietly. "Let this end here." For a moment, I could see the appeal clearly. Signing would close the loop. The machine would keep moving. My platoon would be protected from scrutiny. The night would be filed away and softened by language until it barely resembled what we lived through. I picked up the clipboard and held it. Not because I was undecided, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it one last time. The generator hummed on, filling the tent, patient and unmoved. Then an image surfaced without warning. A bright yellow grocery bag twisted tight around a wrist. The only color in a world that had gone dark. I slid the clipboard back across the table without signing. I said I could not put my name on something that I knew was not true. The tent went very still. Even the officer did not speak right away. The generator seemed louder in the absence of voices, filling the space where my signature should have been. He looked at me for a long moment, not angry, not surprised, just tired. Then he nodded once, slow and measured, like he had expected this answer even while hoping for another. He took the report back and added a single line near the bottom. "First Lieutenant Rachel Monroe declined to sign pending review." He initialed it, closed the folder, and stood. That was it. No threats. No raised voices. No dramatic fallout. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. When I stepped outside, the day had moved on without us. Soldiers went about their tasks. Vehicles idled. Someone laughed near the motor pool. To everyone else, the mission was finished. For me, it felt like standing alone on unfamiliar ground, not unstable, just exposed. The report moved forward without my signature. The mission would still be called a success. The system would adjust and continue, just as it always did. But there was now a small break in the record, a line that showed someone had paused. Someone had refused the easiest ending, and I knew, without anyone needing to say it out loud, that nothing about my path forward would be simple again. What followed did not arrive all at once. It came in delays. Days passed, then weeks, without clear resolution. The investigation did not close, but it did not move either. Requests for clarification were acknowledged and then set aside. I was told to remain available, then told nothing else. Rumors filled the empty space where answers should have been. Reassignment. Temporary duty. A career pause that would never be written down but would still be felt. Inside the platoon, the air changed. Some soldiers stopped coming to me the way they used to. Conversations cut short when I entered a room, not out of anger, out of caution. Being close to someone who had slowed the process felt dangerous, even if no one ever said it aloud. Others did the opposite, but quietly. Holt spoke to me one evening when the motor pool was nearly empty. He did not thank me, he just said I did what I could and that it mattered. Then he changed the subject. From him, that was everything. Alvarez checked in without ceremony, steady as ever, letting me know she was still there. Raines avoided me for days, then finally stopped me in passing just to say he was glad someone had said no. He did not look up when he said it. The final report came down later than expected. Amended, but incomplete. Language adjusted just enough to acknowledge uncertainty without assigning responsibility. Civilian presence listed as possible. Intelligence noted as outdated. No mention of hesitation. No mention of conflicting instructions. My refusal existed only as a procedural note buried deep in the record. There was no public acknowledgement. No briefing. No lesson learned slide. The mission remained labeled a success. The system absorbed the friction and moved on. I stayed in uniform, but my role narrowed. Less visibility. Fewer opportunities. Nothing that could be pointed to as punishment. Just distance. Leadership, I learned, is remembered as much for what it disrupts as for what it accomplishes. Trust changed shape after that. I stopped assuming it flowed cleanly through rank or process. I learned it moved sideways instead, passed quietly between people who watched how you acted when things went wrong. Years later, long after I left that base and those planes behind, the memory still surfaced without warning. Not the shot, not even the faces. It was the silence afterward, the waiting. The moment when everyone looked somewhere else and hoped the record would take care of it. That silence stayed with me. Not as guilt, but as weight. A reminder that integrity rarely resolves cleanly, and that some decisions echo longer than any deployment ever does. Years have passed since Fort Calder, since the planes and the wind and the low hum of generators that never seemed to stop. I am far from that base now, far from the uniform I wore then, but that unsigned line still follows me. It surfaces in quiet moments, when a decision slows my hand, when silence feels too easy. For a long time, I believed truth was corrective. That if you told it clearly enough, it would fix what was broken. I know now that truth does not repair everything. It does not undo loss. It does not make systems kinder. Sometimes all it does is refuse to let something disappear. Refusing to sign that report did not bring closure. It did not protect every career. It did not make me popular. In some ways, it narrowed my world. Leadership can be isolating when it challenges comfort instead of reinforcing it. But accuracy matters. It matters because records outlive people. Because language decides what is remembered and what is quietly erased. Because the dead deserve more than clean phrasing, and the living deserve not to be asked to carry a lie forward. I do not tell this story to be admired, and I do not tell it to assign blame. I tell it because silence becomes official if no one interrupts it. That unsigned name stayed behind on paper, but it moved forward with me. I learned that the hardest report you will ever write is the one you leave blank. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.